Welcome to Screen Quest, a podcast where a fellowship of film lovers and armchair movie experts plays film roulette. I am one of your hosts, Chris Waterman from Jacksonville, Florida, joined by May Finch of Jacksonville, Florida.
Hello, hello.
And we have Mr. Will Rotondi from Greenville, South Carolina.
Hey, how's it going?
Well, two of us might be underwater and under siege from a tropical storm soon. So it's going well.
It's just Florida life, just Florida things.
Florida life. Really, the most important thing is did you stock up on snacks and some booze or comfort stuff, whatever that is for you?
I have snacks, frozen pizza, Easy Mac, whole 9 yards.
Hell yeah. That's really the most important thing. But yes, we are trying to hopefully endure the tropical storm. Well, it's Hurricane Ian, but it'll be tropical storm by the time it gets here. Hopefully it does not affect our recording schedule for this Sunday. TBD, obviously. We'll try to keep you posted on social media. But yeah, that's what two of us are up to. Will, what have you been up to?
A whole lot of, it's not a whole lot going on, man. It's got school and just the usual, taking care of this backyard that I've been updating. So that's been a lot of fun, house projects, but pretty quiet.
Very cool. We are going to do a little opener segment here. I've prepared a bit of a surprise or spontaneous opener for my guests. So what we've done, we are all currently paused on Ryan Reynolds' Twitter account. I have seen this video, but my co-host haven't. So I thought it'd be fun to watch them react in real time. So I'm going to give a little countdown here, and I'll probably edit the clip in so that it plays as you guys react. So feel free to react in any way that feels natural to you. Are you both ready?
As
I'm ready.
I will ever be.
Okay, great. Here comes the countdown. 3, 2, 1, go.
Hey everyone, we're extremely sad to have missed D23, but we've been working very hard on the next Deadpool film for a good long while now.
I've had to really search my soul on this one.
His first appearance in the MCU obviously needs to feel special. We need to stay true to the character, find new depth, new motivation, new meaning.
Every Deadpool needs to
that
stand
typewriter.
out and stand apart. It's been an incredible challenge
little plug
that
for
has
his gin
forced
there.
me to reach down deep inside.
And I have nothing. Yeah, just completely empty up here.
That's going
And
to become a
terrifying.
reaction gif.
But we did have one idea. Hey Hugh, you want to play Wolverine one more time?
Yeah, sure, Ryan.
Nice.
Amazing.
Alrighty, so that's the news. Hugh Jackman is back as Wolverine in the new Deadpool, which is going to be part of the MCU. What's your reactions on that? I'll go last. I'm curious to hear what you both think about this.
It felt very Deadpool, but also just very Ryan Reynolds. I loved the opening with the inspirational music and the sunlight filtering behind his head. Great use of visual comedy. Again, I want that typewriter he had, but I'm excited. It's probably the best promo I've seen for MCU stuff recently. I'm sorry, I can't avoid shitting on Marvel whenever we talk about that.
Yeah, it's
Flashbacks.
okay. Yeah,
Yep.
no, it's okay.
What about you, Will?
I don't know. I'm stoked. I love Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and I've enjoyed Deadpool, so I'm really excited to see how that turns out. I mean, you're already setting yourself up for a lot of expectation, but I feel like they can deliver. So I'm ready. Let's do it.
I love the lack of fanfare of that. The MCU is normally so guarded, and secretive. It was such a breath of fresh air, to see Hugh Jackman just nonchalantly walk across the background there. And you know, it's I think, as May said, very on point with what Deadpool was supposed to feel like. So yeah, I think if Hugh Jackman's gonna resume his role, I love that he's gonna be in Deadpool, because we already got the super serious, grounded Logan, which I loved. Like, it's, I think, one of the best superhero movies ever. If you've never seen it, like, it is fabulous. Marianne, who doesn't like superhero movies at all, like, loved it. It's great. But I think I could do with Wolverine being in an R-rated Deadpool movie. I think it's a great fit. It, like, fits the mythology too, you know, with Deadpool typically being kind of tied to the X-Men. So yeah, I'm all for it. I just thought that was a great alternative way to do that. So well done, I guess, Marvel, for not exactly like what's the opposite of low-hanging fruit, but yeah, like people are going to be excited, obviously, but I think it was a smart move to do it that way.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. May, I know you've mentioned you like Deadpool a lot. You've seen both the Deadpool movies then?
I like him more than a lot of the other like superhero characters, just because like he's funny, he doesn't take himself too seriously. I feel like I got kind of burnt out of like the self-important superheroes, which is part of why I'm excited for this one. Just like you said, breath of fresh air compared to kind of the like almost over marketed hype of a lot of superhero films these days.
Oh, man, the current phase of the MCU, I don't know how you feel, Will. I can probably guess how you feel, May, if you've even engaged with them, but they've not done much for me. Like, I have not watched the last several shows. Like, the last few movies I've gone to, I've just felt mostly numb, like a few chuckles here and there, but there's just a general lack of excitement or anything new, which kind of sucks. You know, I mean, Endgame and Infinity War were awesome. Like, I think those are like excellent examples of like how you do a glorious payoff and really build to something that feels special and epic in scale. But I have not given a fuck, man. Like, I haven't thought about them since I've seen any of them. I have had no urge to watch them, which is not something I'm used to, because I generally speaking have enjoyed, for the most part, my journey through the MCU. So, except for Spider-Man No Way Home, that was the exception. But that's, I think, also, again, pretty low-hanging fruit. Like, you are literally making me engage with my childhood, you know, like the nostalgia factor was super high on that one. But
I have a very short anecdote to, I guess, somewhat explain my Marvel hatred, my Marvel
Please.
villain backstory.
Yes.
The breaking point for me actually was Infinity War. I went to go see that with a friend in college and just hated it. I have a long list of problems with the movie, but it generally seemed like you said, it is setting up like high stakes for like a much larger like later payoff, but I couldn't get on board with the stakes. Like, they never felt very real to me. It felt like it was too much, almost like if every superhero movie is about the end of the world, or, you know, the end of the universe, I guess, in this case. It's hard to like feel like every single instance in the same universe is as important, and I just got really burned out by the time Infinity War came.
Yeah, that's a fair. There's been a lot of those movies like in a pretty short period of time, so I think that's
my friend agreed with me, and we actually burned our tickets after we watched the show.
Wow. Yeah, I think, like, you know, as much as you can shit on like the DCEU, I think what makes
that's
that
very low hanging fruit.
Yeah, but I think what you know, say what you want about like holistically, what's made some of that work better for me than like the MCU lately is like those like one-off films like Joker and like the Batman and the Suicide Squad, not Suicide Squad, but the Suicide Squad, the James Gunn one. because like there's not that pressure to have everything feel connected, and like none of the stories have been like really like world ending shit. Like now they did like the Justice League movie, which is like a totally different beast, but like I enjoy them for that reason. Like I love
Mhm.
oh, and then like the emancipation of Harley Quinn, like that whole thing was fucking great. Birds of Prey, like the emancipation of Harley Quinn or whatever the full title was amazing, because it was small in scale and it was more of like a character driven thing, where it's not trying to be like family friendly. Like the Marvel quipism is really getting old pretty fucking quick, man. Like
Yes.
Ragnarok was an
Yes.
abomination. Like that was, and I love Taika, like I do, and like Ragnarok had some funny moments, but like I feel like they took everything that like the MCU is like kind of done, not wrong, but like where like it's almost become like a pastiche like of itself. I don't know, it's just like, oh man, this, I'm not enjoying this at all, like at all. Like you're taking the wrong lessons like from why people like these movies, but it is what it is.
Yeah,
So
I think at that point I actually liked Ragnarok, but I totally agree with your point. I
Oh,
just
not
think
Ragnarok. Sorry. Let me correct myself before the internet destroys me. Love and Thunder. Love and Thunder. I love Ragnarok.
Oh,
Ragnarok was great. Love and Thunder.
that's
Love and
reasonable.
Thunder.
That's reasonable.
Yeah. Ragnarok's great. Love and Thunder is what I mean. I have no problems with Ragnarok. I think that's one of the best MCU movies. So please don't murder me in the comments, everybody.
Chris is going to edit that part out. It's okay.
No, I'll
No,
leave it in.
Chris,
and
you got to leave it in.
change.
No, I'll leave it in. I'm fallible.
Change.
I'm fallible.
And yeah, just to bring it back to Deadpool, I think that's part of why I love the first Deadpool movie, is because it's like, yeah, there's a greater threat there, but it's also just a very personal revenge story, right? Like,
So we'll see. Maybe this is what the MCU needs. I kind of sort of enjoyed the new Doctor Strange, but that's only because Sam Raimi, like that's probably the most interesting it's gotten. And surprise, surprise, it's one of the most polarizing MCU fans. Like there are people that hated it because it wasn't like the familiar MCU fare. You see literally a walking corpse like getting smacked around and stuff, and people are like, what is this? And it's like, oh, this is what I came for right here, man. This is Sam Raimi at his finest. But yes, okay, well, enough about the MCU. Let's have a quick side quest, and then we're going to be jumping into speaking of James Gunn, talking about Slither, which is our film of the show. It's a camper cringe. So let's draw a side quest, see what we got here. That's such a satisfying sound, the little shuffle. Okay, so this is, and I'd like to thank, so this is where we talk about a film that is influential in your life, got you into movies, or has some sort of special place for one reason or another. I actually got one for this. If either of you guys are wanting to go, you can. Otherwise, like I'm happy to talk about a movie here.
I say take it away.
Fantastic. So my nomination is Casablanca. This is a special film to me because I watched it with my grandmother for the first time, and it's what made me realize as like a adolescent that classic film was awesome, and that like being snooty about black and white and like quote unquote old movies was like a pretty stupid thing. Like I was not expecting to like it. I was like, oh, this is like, I was like the little boy in the Princess Bride. Like this is like some like romantic, like, I don't know, smoochy movie. Like it's old as shit. It's parodied all the time. Like I knew all the like the references, all the lines and stuff. And I was glued to the to the television for the hour and a half plus runtime, and it quickly became like one of my favorite movies ever. I think it's just a great example of an excellent script, being acted impeccably, and it stands the test of time. And it's what really set me on my journey. From there, I started watching all manner of films, from kind of worked back to like Citizen Kane, and like picked up like this book of like AFI 100 greatest movies, which is a list they've revised at least once, I think, and just literally started going through and just like boom boom, like watching as much as I could get my hands on, renting stuff from the library. So yeah, special movie for that reason, and it's just one of the best ever. Have you both seen Casablanca?
I actually have.
Definitely.
I know I haven't seen a lot of classic films, but I have seen that one, and um, I remember thinking similarly that I had low expectations of it as an old film. I was a kid, so of course I was used to all the flashy, colorful stuff, and I hadn't really seen much classic film yet. So I was like pleasantly surprised that I enjoyed it overall as a movie. And I think what really stuck out to me is so I play piano, and I've been playing piano since I was quite young. And the first song I ever learned was Heart and Soul, and my parents taught it to me. And I found out later it's because they both loved this movie so much that they individually learned how to play the song. And so that was kind of a cool connection for me.
And Will, you said you've seen it as well.
Yeah, man, probably college was the first time. I don't think that my folks were really. My dad's probably more into Casablanca than my mom is, but I feel like I didn't see this until college in film class, and definitely appreciate it for what it is. I love going back and watching it even now. My wife had never seen it until recently, and so she watched it for the first time this past year. And yeah, it's great. I mean, I love was it Captain Renault, who's always got all the great one-liners in that. And it's Claude Rains, I think. But yeah, I mean, classic film, timeless in a lot of ways. And yeah, it's great.
I'm shocked to find that there's gambling going on here. Here's your winnings, sir.
You're
Oh,
winning,
thank
sir.
Yeah, man, like there's so many scenes that like still like have such a strong emotional impact on me. My favorite's probably the La Marseillaise, like when the Germans are like singing, and Victor Laszlo goes over to the band and makes them play, La Marseillaise, which is like the French national anthem, and the whole crowd drowns out the Germans. Like I get teared up every time I watch that scene because it's just so powerful and amazing, and just the emotion on everyone's faces. You've got kind of the trampy like lady that's like in love with Rick, who like is trying to make him jealous by hitting on like the German soldiers, and like she's like got tears running down her face and like singing it. It's just such an amazing moment in a movie packed with amazing moments. And I think like one of the most unconventional endings, man, like props for being like, that must have been ballsy back then to
Honestly,
not
yeah.
have them end up together, right? Like I love it. I was shocked as a kid, like what the fuck, like they're all this, and like she's getting on the plane and he's not. Oh, that's what that line meant. Oh, right. Very cool.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's definitely like in Princess. You would be like the kid in Princess Bride saying, "You're reading it wrong. That's not how the story is.
You showed me the wrong version, Grandma." Like,
yeah,
this is the TV edit or something.
This is the bad ending. Where's the
They're
good
supposed
ending?
to end up together. What? No.
That's cute.
Well,
I probably had a similar reaction, but
I like the antithetical, like to Hollywood endings, and there's a handful of movies like from the 40s and 50s that go against the grain, and I appreciate them for that, for sure. It feels almost like New Hollywood before New Hollywood in that way, I think, a little bit. I'm now going to turn it over to Mr. Rotondi, who has nominated, and just by coincidence, I might add, right on the cusp of October, Slither, which we're going to be discussing in the context of Camper Cringe. So take it away, Will.
Awesome. Thanks. And yeah, Slither is very appropriate for Halloween, just by the sheer number of, I feel like, horror films that it tries to throw out little nods to. But I guess in a nutshell, it's about an alien parasite that happens to come to Earth on a meteor. So that whole setup in and of itself, I would just seem kind of campy from the get-go, but it involves a man named Grant, who is played by Michael Rooker, who he's been drinking, and he almost borderline cheating on his wife after having an argument with her and going out to the local bar to get completely trashed. And he is hanging out with a lady named Brenda, and they're kind of hanging out in the woods like you do, I guess. He ends up coming across this slug that has come out of the meteor that's kind of slowly slithering its way through the grass, and he starts kind of poking at it, and it shoots up a little spine that goes into his body and slowly starts to transform him into the interesting creature that we see at the culmination of the film. And along the way, we're introduced to his wife, Starla, who's played by Elizabeth Banks, as well as the local chief of police, Billy, played by Nathan Fillion. And they and local law enforcement, and to some extent other people in the town, have to try and survive this infestation of creatures, these little worms, I guess, for lack of a better term, that are going around and trying to infect everybody to make them all part of this hive consciousness. So there's a lot of CG and practical blood and guts that take place after that. There's a lot of dead dogs, unfortunately. I'm sorry, May. There's a lot I feel like cats. There's like a dead cat, cattle, even a deer. So there's a lot of animal fatalities in this film. But yeah, overall, I feel like this was kind of on par for what was coming out around. What was this, like? Trying to think about how far back this was. 06 maybe that this movie came out. And I'm trying to remember like how I felt when I saw this film the first time, because going back and watching it now, I have very different impressions of this movie because it's been a long time, and I don't think I've watched it in between this and like that would have been college. So yeah, that's just imagining the mindset of when I saw this, and probably also feeling like coming off of watching Firefly and knowing Nathan Fillion predominantly for that. So just like watching, I guess, a less mopey Mal Reynolds try to go around and kill some aliens was entertaining in that respect. But yeah, going back and watching this again, there's some things to talk about. So before we jump into all that and deciding on exactly whether we would call this camp or cringe or both to one degree or another, I guess a really friendly refresher is that camp is considered the aesthetic style that inverts our conception of what's traditionally beautiful or realistic by replacing it with the unrealistic, the outlandish, or just bad taste spectacle. So something that's cheesy, naive, or has a lot of shock value. I would say before we jump into some specific stuff, I've got a few items that I'd like to talk about, but I know that just based on time, and there's quite a bit you can unpack from this film, we may end up cutting some of it or discussing some items that I'm sure you guys want to talk about too. So give it a, an equal round on that. But as always, first impressions. So I will turn it over to you, Chris, to give us your thoughts. And had you seen this film before, or was this the first time for you?
No, so I first saw it a few years after it came out at a buddy's house for Halloween. And I remember like loving it then. And then during quarantine, Marianne and I watched it. And I'm not sure what you're gonna say as far as like your reaction like now versus then. But I had a very different reaction where like there's some bits of this that like I still really love, but I felt like it didn't age particularly as well as I thought it was going to, like when I watched it. And I soured on it quite a few levels in terms of like, I don't know, rewatchability or like classic status and that kind of thing. So this was not the first time I'd seen, like I said, as recently as like maybe a year and a half ago. Overall impressions, like I love Nathan Fillion, I love Elizabeth Banks. I think a lot of the effects works great in the film. I think that there is like a strong James Gunn stamp on this, like a lot of his humor, if you kind of track it to Guardians and the Suicide Squad, and if anyone's watched Peacemaker, like I can see like the through line there. But I couldn't help but think, especially like watching it this past week, of sort of his near cancellation from like old tweets to him being like, hey, I've grown. And I think like the filmmaking kind of reflects that, and this movie almost seems like that same James Gunn maybe a little bit, that made some of the jokes that he regretted and sort of like walked back, and kept up, but said like, yeah, this is like reflects kind of a different person in a different time, and like it wasn't okay. Not that I think this movie is like, mind you, like I don't know, like taboo or like so like cringy that like it's not worth like watching or something like that. But that's my general impression, I guess, not to go too far down a tangent.
No, I mean, I can definitely relate. How about you, May? What are your thoughts?
Very similar to Chris's. This was my first time seeing it, period. So I didn't have kind of that same shift you two talked about in time. And like having seen Guardians of the Galaxy, I was like, is this just like small town cop version of Star-Lord? Because it feels like small town cop version of Star-Lord. It had moments when I was like, oh my God, and just kind of like impressed, like they had the guts to actually film scenes the way they filmed them. And it was like I was impressed and disturbed, which is kind of what I want from a horror film. Other moments that were just kind of like jokes that do not land. And I think that my main problem with it is just that, like, for the risks it takes, it can't get away from kind of a hero's journey. Guy has to get the girl, like a lot of tropes. It's very tropey in a way that doesn't seem to play with them or subvert them as much as I would have liked. So yeah, it was an experience. The don't feel too bad. Well, the dogs were to me not super realistic and did not make me too sad. Just a little sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Not
stuff you
even
would see
the-
in like in a haunted house, right? Like that's what it
Yeah.
reminded me of. Like,
Yeah.
kind of nondescript meat, most of it. Like honestly.
I did feel really bad because there's that one moment when you actually hear a dog whimper and Ellie reacted
Yeah.
to the screen, and I was like, oh no, Ellie, it's okay. It's just a
Aw.
movie.
That's right. Weird alien worms can't hurt you.
Exactly.
If not, we have NASA's defense for that now. So just push that away from the planet. It's all right. But yeah, I feel like a lot of that too was it's sort of the same feeling of like, yeah, you tried and I could see that what you were maybe going for, but it just didn't really stick the landing. And some of it's entertaining. I felt like I really kind of kicked in once it became like we have to go out and fight this monster, and then it's sort of like the banter with the whole group together. I'm like, all right, I can kind of see that you've got kind of a good rhythm going now. It's not so off-putting as it kind of felt for like the first 20 to 40 minutes or so. But then after that, it's just sort of kind of stumbled and kind of regained it and kind of lost it. And by the end, I'm like, yeah, okay. Well, that was something. Yeah. But I guess we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that idea and sort of where we stand on Camper Cringe with some of the scenes that really stuck out to us. So, and I have to ask Bay, just out of curiosity, you talked about some of the stuff that you were just like, wow, they had the balls to do that. So before we go too far into one direction or the other, would you mind either discussing one of them, or would you be willing to kind of lay out a few of them?
I mean, the first one for me is that like in a lot of alien stories, especially like alien abduction or probing, there is kind of like a sexual subtext, and this just made it like, no, that is text, that is in your face. So I was kind of impressed with that, I guess, and disgusted at the same time, like I said. Especially the scene like, oh God, I can't imagine how awkward I must have been on set that day when they're filming the scene where Grant is infected and he goes to Brenda's house to like infect her. That is a long scene, and thank God they like cut it up with like flashing over to Starla and Party at the party. But yeah, that was a lot. I'm
Yeah, for
shocked
all
that all
intents and
made it.
purposes, it's a rape scene, but with like alien appendages, like, and it's
Yeah.
like directly into the womb. Like, I mean, that's what it, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gives me the willies for sure.
It's a lot. So yeah, I was a little shocked at that, but I think what I appreciated about that is like that is the subtext of a lot of alien abduction and kind of like body horror with alien abduction. And I was like, yeah, you just made this explicit. Okay. That was the main one. Another was just when they finally find Brenda and she, spoiler alert, explodes.
Yeah.
So yeah, just probably moments with the highest shock value, I would say.
It's interesting you mentioned too with Brenda, because that's the first thing that came to my mind that turned me off watching this again was how they treated her character. And I know that sort of piggybacking off of what you were saying, that it's very typical in horror movies, you know, like people have sex and they die, or somehow it's sexualized in the act of the horror that's taking place. And, you know, even if we wanted to think about this as like an alien film too, in the sense of the actual movie Alien, which was very much sexualized and about rape. And so watching it, it's, you know, my first thought was, okay, so they're trying to sort of reference that, but at the same point, I just thought it was so, I don't know, it was so over the top and unexpected, I guess, because I sort of thought, you know, with James Gunn and everything, it's like it's going to be kind of quirky and dark, but this just felt very dark to me watching it again. And especially for his character to be so in control when he's around his wife, to not, you know, harm her. And yet he's like, okay, well, I'm just going to like go, you know, kill this other person to satisfy the creature's needs that's within me. I felt, I don't know, in the one respect, I felt bad for him, but at the same time, it's like, you know, I don't know, because you question like how much of him is in control and how much is not, and what he has the power to do in what circumstance. But yeah, there was just a whole lot going on there. I think that in some ways they tried to make it a little less intense by just sort of how, like toward the end of it, it almost looked like she was like rocking around in such a way to make it look like when somebody is taken over and they just sort of spasm in a goofy manner in certain science fiction horror, to make it look like, okay, it's not as bad. Like there's not like a lot more, I don't know, necessarily like screaming like when people get attacked by aliens in that manner in other films that there usually is. It was more just like, okay, now she's just convulsing and it's not like as big of a deal. I feel like that may or may not. That was just sort of a weird vibe that I got by the end of it. But yeah, then cut to when we see her later and how much she has been like blown up, like what, Veruca Salt in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, because she is craving all of this raw meat, like just like her husband was too, like Grant was when he was infected. And sorry, not her husband rather, but as Grant was as well when he was infected. And yeah, it's wild, man. And I think that in some ways they still tried to make her character a little goofy toward the end, like when she's making some crack about, oh, they're like eating through me right now. But it just, the whole thing just felt really awkward the entire way through. And yeah, and then after that, it went back into like classic sort of quirky horror mode where, okay, these creatures are going and infecting everybody and we have to go shoot them all. And it's okay, and random death and destruction may happen and people may die, but it won't be as like, I don't know, in your face and sort of disturbing as that felt to me. But I don't know, Chris, you kind of mentioned a little bit too from that and watching it. What anything to add or agree,
I
disagree with
think
on that?
it's disturbing as it is. Like like the Brenda storyline kind of works for me because it does have that self-awareness of like, there's the punitive aspect, right, for the person that has loose morals, right? So it does feel old school in that way of like, she's the one that's transgressing, so she's the one that's going to receive the punishment. You know, it's not really like a slasher, you know, that's like slitting her throat, but she becomes sort of the vessel for these gross slugs, right? So I think for that reason it works a little. It's uncomfortable certainly, and it's grotesque, like the way her skin is stretched. Like that's actually one of the bits of the movie I really I has to use the word enjoyed, but like I felt like still kind of held up and like it was effective, right? Like that it was disturbing, but it felt self-aware enough and like in line with the genre that like I was okay with it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
One more thought on the subject of Brenda, like in addition to just kind of like like Chris is saying, with the way the like quote unquote morally loose characters are treated in horror films, there's also like the kind of Madonna horror dichotomy going on between Starla and Brenda, especially since Starla is put up on this pedestal by this intergalactic parasite. as this kind of perfect, pure, ideal woman, and put on a
Yeah.
pedestal by the entire framing of the movie, really.
Yeah.
As opposed to Brenda. And I think that gets glossed over easily because it is kind of a throwaway line, is the last time she saw Grant, she was a child.
Oh God,
And
that.
yeah.
Ooh, I was game like when she was 10 or whatever. It's like, oh God,
Mhm.
that's an example of like one of the lines from Eva. I'm like, did you need to say
Yeah.
that? That's,
Whoopsies.
I know you're supposed to be
Yeah.
in South Carolina. No offense, Will. But Jesus.
So like
Yeah.
there's it's just it's clearly like not a super healthy dynamic there. And yeah, Brenda deserved better. That's all I'll
Yeah.
say.
All I
Agreed.
could think of the entire time was the Tupac song, Brenda's Got a Baby.
Oh
Oh
God.
no.
I
Oh
don't know, it's just like it
no.
was persistently running through my brain this most recent time, which is
Oh,
just a
no.
little sneak peek into what's going on up here. But yeah.
Could you spin a little riff of that on the
No, oh
video
gosh,
for
no,
us, or
nope,
do you think
nope, nope.
we get flagged faster than anybody's business on it?
Oh, I'll play. I thought you were asking me to rap, and I was like, "Dear God, no."
Oh wait,
Oh,
that'd be
even
better.
better. Yeah, because that
Yeah.
way we could have the
Mm-mm.
whole thing, right? And you won't
Yeah.
get in trouble because it's
Yeah, nope. Negative. Nope. I'm not touching that with any football. I
We'll
do
come
not
back
have
when
the
the
flow.
hurricane comes through and you start having some alcohol to, deal with it. We'll come back to that. It's okay. That'll be Sunday.
Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not a chance in hell though, but thank you
Nope.
for the invite.
Yeah. Well, I guess while we're on the subject of sexual innuendo in this film, how about we talk about the bathtub scene that takes place later when we have Kylie, who is the teenager who is introduced as the character who basically gives us the exposition that we need to understand what exactly these worms are, what their motivation is, besides just taking everybody over and eating a lot of animals, or possibly people too. I guess some people get chewed on, but it's interesting because in a lot of ways that scene is supposed to be like a callback, right? There's a couple of films. I mean, we've got like what, Nightmare on Elm Street, was that right? Like Freddy Krueger and the whole thing where there's a girl in the bathtub that falls asleep and then Freddy's hand comes up out of the water. But then there was another film too, and I wish I could remember it, but it was supposed to also be like a callback to another bathtub scene. So very much, I guess, in keeping with the referencing that they're trying to do, but also kind of reinforcing the fact that a lot of horror is very much sexualized. But I don't know, thoughts about that scene in particular, if that seemed to stand out to you in any particular way besides that, or what your thoughts were about that as being the way of explaining what's going on, or anything else that might have come to mind. And May, I'll pass it back over to you.
It made me deeply uncomfortable, the entire scene. Yeah, I mean, it's just the camera work is very suggestive, even when she's just like alone in the bathtub. And it's like
Yeah.
this is a minor. I don't know if the actress was a minor then, but it felt very wrong from a camera direction perspective. And like she essentially gives the larvae a blowjob and gets the info that way.
Yep.
And it's just it's ridiculous and obscene simultaneously. In a way that I don't know if it quite worked, because it, even though it was supposed to then explain the exposition dump that came later, that exposition dump still felt very clunky to me and weird. And I'm not sure like what we're supposed to be thinking or feeling about Kylie as a character. She seems kind of like last minute they're like, oh, we need an extra character to like do these 3 things in the plot, so we're gonna just make her up suddenly. Because like she delivers exposition, she saves Party's life, and that's about it.
So I love a good bathtub scene, not to sound pervy. Bathtubs and showers, like going back to Diabolique, you know, in the 50s and Psycho in the 60s.
Ellie is
like,
shaming you. I'm sorry.
oh, it's okay, Ellie. We're friends still. You know, like there's a vulnerability in those are like safe spaces, you know, and like there's a vulnerability to being naked and you know in the tub or in the shower, and they make for some of the best, like, you know, traditionally anyway, like scenes of like really adding to that feeling of vulnerability and sort of dread and terror. But yeah, like I think that the scene itself it works well for me. I even kind of like I know it's a little sexualized, but I kind of like it worked for me, like the screwball, like again it felt very Evil Dead, with like the struggle with the parasite and all of that. I hated the exposition dump. I do feel like that character was there just to kind of serve that purpose, and also like to have somebody in a bathtub. Like it could have just as easily been Elizabeth Banks and it would have worked fine. But I don't think that you always need a motivation for your monsters, right? Or really to even explain it. Although they do a similar thing and it didn't bother me in the Thing, where they kind of explain like what that is, or maybe it's more the implications. But in any event, sometimes I think it's just scarier for something to be, you know, I don't need to know like its entire, like, you know, existence, like history and like what its motivations are in order
We
to make it
also,
scary.
you know, from the opening scene that it came in on an asteroid too, which
Yeah.
is like it. Okay, it's an alien. That's all I gotta know.
Right. And you can kind of put two and two together, like as you're seeing the town being taken over, like presumably it's going to continue to spread, right? I feel like the threat of like global catastrophe is pretty much just implied by what you're seeing it doing in this small town, right? But so yeah, the like that part of it didn't work for me. And again, I'm fine with the scene. It's like I said, I think you can really do some creepy interesting things around bathtubs and showers, or you know, same thing with, you know, sleeping, right? Like scenes where people are sleeping. I think that's what makes Nightmare on Elm Street work so well. But I don't feel like that character served much of a purpose at all.
I think in some ways when I watched it, my first gut reaction, and sort of thinking about it in the context of where they end up at the end of the film, was that she was very much like Newt from Aliens in some ways, or trying to be. Not in that I don't agree that Newt in Aliens it was unnecessary, because I liked her character and that character was necessary to that storyline. But I felt like they were trying to go for that a little bit with we're going to throw in this extra character who somehow survives where everybody else doesn't, who's younger, and may provide some helpful feedback. Kind of like Newt gave a little bit of feedback in Aliens to help the Marines out, and then is sort of shown as like part of this family unit that makes it out of the end, that we've got kind of in the scene, which I'm kind of my head for the YouTube video, my head is obstructing her, but having her and Billy and Starla all together and sort of reinforcing that family dynamic at the very end is making it out. Felt very much like how it was with Newt and Ripley at the end
And
of
Hicks.
Aliens, and Hicks. Yeah. Oh yeah, R.I.P. Hicks. Love that guy. But yeah, so but yeah, no, that was sort of what I thought, and I don't know if that's true or not, but that was just kind of the vibe that I got. So it was like,
No, that
okay,
felt very intentional. Just kind of a restoration of the American family after all this chaos.
yeah,
Cleaner than divorce in some ways, you know what I mean? No ugly arguments with lawyers. You just throw a few
I mean, that
slugs.
got very ugly.
Yeah, I mean, nothing to some OxyClean and you know, like
Oh God.
a few mops will take care of. It's funny because like I like that you bring up the comparison to Aliens, because there's a lot of people in like the academic community. Dr. Sparks at Clemson was one of them who loathed Aliens. They felt like making Ripley like into this like mother figure, and then sort of that like traditional like family unit like at the end was like a slap in the face to the independent single woman, you know, that we saw in Alien. I think is a valid interpretation and frustration, but I never felt that. I feel like it, you know, overall like the movie worked for me and like I love it, whereas like I had the opposite reaction in this one where I was just like, This is so predictable. Like you can see this coming from a mile away. I think, as May said earlier, you're not subverting it at all. Like this is ending exactly where I thought it was going to, for the most part. And it's just kind of like, man, like you played around with so many other things. Like, why not have a little bit of fun with this in some way, shape, or form?
I have a related comment, but I can hold on to it if we're going to talk about this later. But I would like to talk about just like all the random xenophobia and how that kind of connects to what we see here with the literal aliens.
Yeah, go for it.
So like there's just like a lot of xenophobic jokes and comments throughout the film, particularly against like Asian people. And this ending is kind of like part of that in terms of just reinforcing like the traditional good American family against, you know, these evil alien forces. And like I was really trying to see if he was doing something more nuanced than that with all of those like random jokes and comments that were sprinkled in. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, but that's kind of the conclusion I came to.
I will say, as somebody who grew up in South Carolina, unfortunately, it did seem pretty true to form to a lot of the, say, like people that I interacted with in a lot of different places in South Carolina, which is unfortunate, but it's true.
And like living in the South, I'd agree. It stood out to me just because like there are so few throwaway lines in a relatively short movie, but they're almost all some kind of a racist joke.
Sorry, go ahead, Will.
No, you're fine. I was just thinking that seems pretty unfortunately typical. I feel like in a lot of, especially like the horror movies that try to have, I don't know, not intentionally obnoxious characters. It's like if they're not xenophobic, then they're bigoted. They'll make like homophobic comments as well, and which also happens. You know, you've got I feel like the mayor was definitely leading most of that.
Yes, and that's clearly to make him, you know, look in like more of a dirtbag, right?
Yeah.
But like I don't know, with the xenophobic comics, like the first one was made by Bill, I think, with like the Gina joke.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just didn't seem to be a like tool to show that they were, you know, morally flawed.
I think that comes from a certain period of movie where like edginess sometimes meant like you just say things that are shocking or crass, right? And like I think back to like the early 2000s to mid 2000s, especially like even like movies like, you know, Super Bad, which I still like love a lot, and some of those early Judd Apatow movies have a lot of that stuff, because it's like that like edginess like equals like, you know,
I'm familiar with edgelords, yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny because like sometimes movies will tackle like, you know, not to go too far into the weeds, like some of those Judd Apatow movies will tackle some really like complicated things like in a surprisingly nuanced, heartfelt way, and then like somebody will, you know, use a homophobic slur like out of nowhere, and you're like, oh man, like why is that, you know, why did it feel necessary at the time? And like it did, you know, it's one of those things that like obviously is talked about a little more openly now, but it wasn't really discussed then. I think you were part of the group that came over to watch Anchorman, right, May?
Yes.
When we screened that, same kind of thing, right, where like there's some bits of that where you're like, this movie's still overall great, but also like, oof, wouldn't do that like if this was made today.
Yeah, I just I don't know, this for a film that like seems like very self-aware in certain things, like with the whole hunting premise, for instance. They're going deer hunting and then get attacked by alien zombie deer towards the end of the film. It seemed more intentional than that to me, but I could also just chalk it up to the culture of the time.
Yeah, be interested to see. I'm sure people on the internet, like they always do, probably have opinions and have spoken about that. I'd be kind of interested to see what kind of discussion, you know, is formed around that. Some like film Reddit and stuff. But
I think what I'd like to do is if either of you have something that also stood out that you want to make sure that we talk about, I'd kind of like to open it up to that here. Or if there is an aspect of this film that you also felt was trying to pay homage. I know that's not technically what the point of this was for this film, but I feel like there were so many references and callbacks in it. In fact, there's like I found an article I can probably share if you want to throw it down in the chat later, that just talked about how much seemed to influence this film, or they tried to reference in this film as a callback in some way. Whether you've got McCready, who's the mayor, who is like supposed to be referencing Kurt Russell's character from The Thing, or if we're talking about some of the other horror tropes that we've seen in it. So I was curious if there was either something with that stuck out to either of you, or if there was another scene that was really, that you felt was a good, I guess, contested in terms of whether we want to push that meter far over to the camp or back over to the cringe. And Chris, I'm going to go ahead and throw it back over to you, sir, to see if there's anything else you'd like to add in that.
It's mostly for me, like the little things, the very obvious riff on the Predator music when they're getting all the guns out of
Oh, yes,
the gun safe and the
yes.
grenades, these people are obviously like the opposite of Green Berets, right? But I enjoyed that, like kind of just like I like musical cues and things like that. So I thought that was a fun little tip of the hat. We talked about the Nightmare on Elm Street. I feel like there is like some Sam Raimi-esque aspects. The discovery of the slug itself is very reminiscent of the Blob, if you've ever seen that, like the original Steve McQueen, which literally it's like the guy pokes it like the meteor with a stick, and then the slime crawls up the stick and gets on his arm, right? And I really like the town coming together, and sort of the growing threat has a lot of like to me, I see a lot of the Blob in this movie. So those are just a few of them that like I enjoyed. I think it was self-referential a lot, like, and self-aware of like what came before. And I think that added to my enjoyment of it.
All I wanted to say was I'm glad that you mentioned the Predator thing, because I totally noticed that too. But then I was like, is that exactly the same tune? Or was that somebody did like a little bit of a riff on it? So it sounds close, but it's not quite. And it was, it was like, nah, it's not really there. We're not stepping on anybody's copyright, but we were definitely emulating it. So that's it. I'm sorry, man. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I don't have too much to add. The two things I picked up on were, and I'm not sure if this is a reference or not, but if you guys have ever watched Stargate, the one of the alien races is also like worm-like and like lives in its host's stomachs, and that felt like a pretty intentional reference there. And similarly, like, controls the brain and is like prioritized with colonization and giving birth to itself, basically. So that my mind immediately went to Stargate when I saw that. The other thing is just the dialogue. It got very like Joss Whedon-y at certain points.
Yeah.
Especially Bill. He had this one line when he I can't remember the exact words, but he said something kind of like brash, and then he was like, "Oh, there goes my like, cool guy demeanor," or something like that. I'm like, I groaned out loud. So yeah, the Joss Whedon dialogue definitely moved it closer to cringe for me. Maybe one day that'll come around to being camp again, but today is not that day.
Nice.
You did remind me of one other reference, which is the Wrath of Khan. Like there's definitely some, like when the things are going into the body. One of the biggest non-horror like movie like scenes that fucking frightened me like to no end as a kid was that ear scene in the Wrath of Khan.
Oh jeez.
Like, so that's all I'll say. I don't know if May's seen Wrath of Khan, so I don't want to like get too specific, but boy.
No, you're good. You're good.
Yeah, man. Yeah, poor Chekhov, dude. Like that. I remember being disturbed by that when I was a kid too, and watching that. And yeah, for a Star Trek film, like they definitely, after watching that stuff as a television series and then going from that to film and watching that kind of violence, I mean, it's pretty surprising, I think, or at least I would imagine it was back then. It was to me as a kid, but then again, a lot of stuff seemed to affect me as a kid, as we've talked about in my therapy sessions on this podcast, that have definitely influenced who I am today. Jaws, thank you, E.T., and the weird fucking creature from Star Trek. So cool. We've got a bingo on there now, a trifecta. But I feel like there was, yeah, oh, and Stargate. I'm glad that actually you brought that up, May, because yeah, Stargate SG-1, gotta show some credit there.
Yeah. If that makes you feel any better, that traumatized me as a child, especially Stargate Atlantis. I really
Yeah.
could not stand the wraiths.
Yeah, they were pretty creepy, weren't they? I'm trying to think
Yeah.
about, it's been a long time since I've watched any of those television series, which were very different from the movie. But yeah, that is a good point. All right, guys. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up what I've got on my end. Any last thoughts, questions, concerns, complaints?
This has
claims
been an
we wanna
interesting
file?
one to watch with other people again, because I couldn't tell if I was just being grumpy, like when I rewatched it about a year and a half ago. I was just saying, like, just because I had such a different reaction than I was expecting. Like, sometimes you like rewatch a movie and you're expecting it to have like gotten better with like time and age, and it always kind of sucks when you're like, oh man.
Yeah.
Hope I haven't recommended this to anybody recently. No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't say it's that far for those by any stretch, but yeah.
I was just gonna say I'm ready to give my verdict.
Yes, absolutely. All right, May, take it away. Tell us what you think.
Ellie is also delivering her verdict. I don't know if you can hear her, but she didn't like the dog scene. I'm sorry, Will.
I mean, who would like that?
Yeah, so this film had a lot of points where it was self-aware and self-referential, and like I said, like did some ballsy things as a horror movie that didn't quite land with me, but I guess I respected the shock value, if nothing else. That being said, my kind of earlier criticism is my main criticism of it not really doing much to subvert any of the many tropes that it's playing with. And I do like all the pop culture references it's making to like the genre, but it just didn't feel like it was much outside of those cobbled together like references and tropes. So I'm gonna have to go with Cringe. I also just I really am tired of characters like Starla who are literally just trophies for the Nathan Fillions of the film industry to snatch up at the end of the movie. Would have been really cool if they'd subverted that. I probably would have said it was camp if they had done something different, but alas, it is Cringe for me.
I hear you. That's one for Cringe. All right, Chris, what do you say?
I'm gonna say that it's camp, but it's bad camp. Like, so I'm gonna give it the camp vote with the stipulation that I don't think it's fully successful. I think the intent is there, and I think there's enough there that I can call it a campy movie, but I would use it as an example of like camp that doesn't really work, which I know sounds like that means that would be cringe, but I don't think it's fully like cringe. I think like compared to like say something like Snakes on a Plane, this movie sets out, I think, a little bit more to, have a bit more of an agenda, we'll say, and to play with some stuff. I just don't, I like May said, I don't think it goes far enough. But I'm gonna say it's camp, but just not good camp.
Yeah, it makes sense. I definitely think you can be bad at something and not immediately make that mean that you are then something else. So wow, that really did not come out as good as I thought it was when I thought it.
I got you. I
Yeah.
follow your drift.
It's all right. It is all good, man. But yeah, so I would have to agree that I'm going to go with agree with May on this one. I think this was more cringe for me. I definitely agree with you, Chris, that this was not what I remembered, I guess, in my mind. I guess I remembered it being goofier and more I don't know. I guess the goofiness that I thought I remembered from it equated in my mind to something that could have been campy, and I sort of went into it expecting it to be campy and thinking, yeah, this was, James Gunn. It's Guardians, right? Same sort of thing, just maybe not as far along as before. And yeah, when I watched it, I thought, no, this is not what I remember. But then again, this was also, I guess, a period in my life where I had a different headspace, and maybe what I took away from this is not nearly what I would take away from it now. So, but yeah, so that's a cringe for me too.
It's, and like you see like how far he's come. Like I said, I love Peacemaker. As somebody who is burned out on superhero shit, it's quite violent, but it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Like, and John Cena is just miraculous in it. But you have a character in there that is like a white supremacist, right? And they're very close in a relationship to Peacemaker, and he has to grapple with that. And like, I'll just say it's his dad, and like his upbringing and all that kind of stuff, and realizing like what he was learning to do as a superhero, and like some of his actions like were influenced by somebody who was like a bad person, right? So there's more self-awareness there. It does subvert expectations, so it's like I could see where he was trying to get to, and I appreciate it as a step on the journey, and I'm glad that he's sort of like taken it further and like learned some lessons. But yeah.
All right, guys. Well, that's all I've got for this. I appreciate you being willing to check out Slither and see how all that went. And so now I guess I'm going to turn it over to you for the next, for I guess our game that we'll have coming up.
No game actually today. We're actually, I think we're gonna, in the interest of time, and also to talk about what is coming up this month in October, gonna give a little like tease of what the game board looks like. So, and explain what we're doing for the month of October. So we are going to be pivoting from our main quest, going to take a month off, and instead we have something called Scream Quest prepared for you. We'll have a featured guest every week, and we will be doing largely double features where the guest will nominate a film in a category that they're excited about. So we've created categories again, but allowed the guest to pick the category this time. So we still have a little bit of that randomness that we've enjoyed on Screen Quest, but also a little more like focus, since it is a 1 month thing. We as a host will also be posting a Twitter poll, which is actually live now and should still be live when this episode goes up, where you as the audience for the first time can have influence on what that second film is going to be. So again, keeping the chaos train rolling. We'll have 3 nominees, one from each of us. We won't tell you whose is who. We're simply going to let the film speak for themselves, and you can tell us what you want us to watch and discuss within the context of the topic that our guest host has chosen. So yeah, enjoy that. Would you guys like to see the game board? I know like you physically won't be able to see it because of the way that our setup works, but I promise I'll show
I
you
would
once
love
we're
to, Chris, but I can't.
once we're done. Yes, once we're done recording. So without further ado, here is our game board. Shout out to Mr. Rotondi for his lovely art skills. He designed our game board, our card backs, our card fronts, and I think it looks great. Again, I'll show both of you once we're off recording, so you can see it as well. But that's what we got cooking for October.
Woo.
You can engage with us as always on social media, on Twitter specifically at ScreenQuest Pod, not Scream Quest, but ScreenQuest Pod on Twitter. So I highly encourage you, if you listen to the show, look out for those polls. They'll traditionally probably be going out like Sunday or Monday. So be on the lookout for them and vote on what you want to see us talk about. This is your time to shine as the audience members, and throw a little more of that chaos our way. We'd love it. And I think that's about all I have to discuss for Screen Quest. I'm very excited for it. I think this is going to be kind of a nice little change for October. I love horror, so
Keep in mind, audience members, this is your unique opportunity to decide exactly how terrified I get every week. So don't miss out on that.
yeah. Would you say that you have maybe the weakest stomach for horror films, or the greatest propensity to be scared, May? Do you think that out of us?
I mean, when you put it like that.
I'm just asking. I'm asking. You can say no.
I have a weak stomach for queasiness. I do
Sure.
love psychological horror.
Mhm.
I may
I
or
mean
may
more
not
like
be
how's your
easily
backbone?
scared.
Like weak stomach maybe is not the best thing. Like, well, how's your backbone? Are like do you scare easy? Or you like
That's
middle of the
information
road?
I don't want my enemies to have, Chris.
Okay. I will tell you flat out, like there's certain genres that I'm a fucking chicken about. There's no logical rhyme or reason. So within the horror, I like it nonetheless, but like there's some shit that I will straight up say I'm a coward. Like I will hide like a little scared wilting flower like afterwards. How about you, Will? What's your threshold? Like, do you think you scare easy, or you, because there's people that just don't flinch like at horror. They're like, oh, I enjoy that, but nah.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that's really made me physically jump watching it, but I think that
Really?
just sort of has weirded me out, that I thought about later and I let my imagination play with a little bit too much. That's definitely come up. I'm trying to think if there's any really good examples, but I think just generally, yeah, it's more of like I guess if there's something that has like a really loud noise, sometimes it's almost involuntary. I will say I probably have jumped maybe once or twice, but anything that's just sort of like, I don't know, even stuff that's meant to just be like shock value, like something that flashes at the screen really quickly, like some of the like I think is it James Wan who does a lot of like the oh, I'm trying to think of the name of the
Conjuring.
Yes, The Conjuring. Thank you. Yeah, stuff like that where it's like jump scares and everything. And I appreciate that. I actually like when it's stuff that sort of sneaks up on you. I'll even say I could dig Signs. I know a lot of people hate that film by Shyamalan, but for me, that was still when I appreciated the stuff he was doing, and I thought that one. And maybe it was just the jump scares. It was the stuff that you didn't know what it was, but it was out there. You could see a shadow or you weren't really sure. And I like that. I like watching that kind of anticipation of what's going to come around the corner. That's why I like Alien, and to a large extent Aliens. I mean, I love me some Space Marines, man. That was less about the horror and what was more about the action, but I think just sort of not knowing what's around the corner, and if you can see it, and if you see it, what it looks like. And yeah, that stuff weirds me out, but in a good way, surprisingly.
So is sci-fi horror your favorite like subgenre within horror?
I would have to say, yeah, definitely. I gravitate to sci-fi a lot, and so for that, I can make that step over into horror pretty easily. Although I guess I've seen, well, nah, I guess not. I feel like probably anything you talk about for horror-wise is probably science fiction to some degree. So
Nice. And May, would you say psychological horror is your favorite like subgenre within?
If that or science fiction horror too. I honestly don't watch a lot of horror
It's gonna
generally.
be a hell of a month for you.
Yeah, I
Potentially 8
know.
films.
like, what have I signed up for?
It's called systematic desensitization. It'll get a little better.
No, I'm excited. It's mostly just like, I think I've mentioned I had like some very, very strict content controls on my household when I was growing up. So like I just never had access to any like scary movies. And then when I was in college, I just didn't really have any friends that wanted to watch scary movies. And I feel like that's generally been a communal thing for me. Like if someone has wanted to go to a horror movie or scary movie, I've been down. But this podcast is a great way of holding me down and holding my eyelids open and getting me to watch some horror.
Right, Clockwork Orange. Yeah, look, I'll make you a promise. Like I'm gonna buy some gourmet popcorn because I always like to in October. And if you need a couple of buddies, Marianne and I got you. You can come over and
Amazing.
watch some of
I'm
these.
going to hold Sumter on my lap.
Yeah, he's pretty hefty. I don't know if you want to do that, but you're welcome to try. Yeah. So last thing, speaking of good horror movies, I highly recommend Barbarian. I'm not going to say anything about it other than you should go in blind and go see it. It was excellent. It's a great way to start off the spooky season. And I guess my favorite horror genre, it's probably a toss-up for me for creature horror. So stuff like The Thing, American Werewolf in London, I love. Or like old school slashers. I think there's so many interesting socio-political things that go on, and some of them not. Some of them are just fun. Like like you can't really argue that many of the Friday the 13th movies are very like deep, but that's also why I like them. Marianne frequently rolls her eyes, like, so every other year or so do like a marathon and just blitz through all of them, just because they're a perfect thing to just have on in the background. And yeah, I'm largely desensitized to anything being remotely scary, so it's just mostly watching the creative gore effects that largely have not held up, which probably were like really gross at the time, but like where you're like, oh, that's amazing. So, all right, well, that brings us to the end. Thank you again for listening and watching. Please do vote on those Twitter polls. Like, I genuinely want to see us get a lot of engagement. And it'll be cool to know that we're watching something that you're interested in, us to talk about. So yeah, until next week, and hopefully again the hurricane doesn't affect things, we'll keep you posted, but fingers crossed, next week we will be back with our first episode of Screen Quest. Until then, cheers, we love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.